What's up, baseball fans? Welcome to another episode of the Payoff Pitch Podcast. I am Brandon Brown, flanked by Jack Ankony and Brady Farkas today. We're down Thomas Brew, but I think we'll be all right, fellas. How are we feeling today after another solid week of baseball?
Mariners finally got a series win, so that makes me feel good. However, they still cannot hit. It's incensing at how bad the Mariners are offensively. But sadly, there are teams that are worse than them in various areas. So proving that April baseball is not made for offense.
Yeah, I think it's been a pretty fun start to the season. A lot of some good contract news, some surprising starts, some disappointing starts. I've been keyed in more closely on the White Sox since we started the new site, and they're finding new ways to lose. Last night with Talkman getting hurt, rounding third, trying to tie the game, had a walk-off walk the other day. So I think it's been a pretty exciting start to the year overall.
Well, Jack, you mentioned new contracts and big news there. Let's talk about that with Vlad Guerrero Jr. If I can spit his name out, he's a happy guy today. He's a very happy guy today.
Yeah, 14 years, $500 million contract. A few days ago, that's about $35 million a year. And it was sort of, that was something that they were talking about in the offseason. Would they work it out? So I think, it was a little bit maybe unexpected that they came to it, at the start of the year instead of the offseason. But, I think it's great for Blue Jays fans and the Blue Jays, obviously, to lock up a 26-year-old hitter who can, crank 30 home runs a year, career 288 hitter, 861 OPS, and an MVP type of candidate. So I think in the short term, it's great for the Blue Jays. I think when you see 14 years, regardless of who the player is, aside from maybe Juan Soto, 14 years is pretty crazy. He'll be 40 years old by the time that's done. So, I think there's a chance that, the back half of the deal looks kind of rough because while he's a great hitter, he doesn't do a whole lot defensively or, doesn't steal bases, things like that. So, I think there's potential for it to sour by the end of the deal, but I think in the short term, if you can win a lot of games with him, it'll turn out to be solid. So
I'm shocked by the deal, and I'm not really worried about the deal either. Like, one, Vlad gave a self-imposed deadline of the first day of spring training. Yeah. Usually players don't like to negotiate in season, and they don't like to negotiate beyond their own ultimatums at that point. So I'm surprised that this got done. I'm surprised the Blue Jays and his agency were able to get together despite the fact that they said they weren't, that Vlad said, I'm not going to talk about this after the first day of spring training. So, it surprises me, and like you're this close to free agency. And look, $500 million is a lot of money, right? We understand that. And if you turn that down, there's certainly risk in going to free agency. But when you're this close and you haven't gotten the deal from the team in spring training, part of me feels like at that point, you just want to see what else is out there and you want to hear from other teams. So I'm surprised that this happened. I'm not really worried about the deal for a couple of reasons. One, with where the market is going, the deals are going to get bigger and bigger over the next several years. So look, when we look at this in 2035, $500 million is going to look like a bargain probably. And hey, the deals are bigger than they should be probably, but like it's going to look like a steal in a couple of years. Secondly, to Jack's point, and you look at it as a negative, Jack, I actually look at it as a positive. None of what Vlad does is tied to defense or base running. Those would be the things I would worry about deteriorating, right? So like his ability to hit, I don't think will leave him for a very long time. So if he stands at first base or becomes a full-time DH in 6 years, I'm not really worried about it. It seemed to work out very well for David Ortiz, right? Where I worry about giving guys big money is when they're tied to, hey, I'm tied to how hard I can throw the ball. That's a skill that deteriorates over time. I'm tied to how fast I can run. That's a skill that deteriorates over time. I'm tied to how fast I can run, and that makes me a great defender. Well, that deteriorates over time. Your ability to hit certainly can deteriorate over time, but for the elite guys, they can do it for a while. So I'm not overly worried about this.
Yeah, I get that point. I guess sort of just what I was saying with the defense and base running thing is like, you're banking on just the bat, and that's kind of it. When you're given a big contract like that, where it's like you see other star type of players who can kind of do multiple things. I think it's a good point about maybe that actually lends better to him in terms of longevity. But it's a big number. I think like you said, it's kind of surprising that it happened this early, but I think for the Blue Jays, you're in a tough division like that, and to kind of keep the star power in there, I think was a good move for them.
Blue Jays had to do this. I mean,
Yeah.
they've whiffed on so many big outside names, Ohtani, Soto. They didn't get Corbin Burns, Max Fried. They didn't really go after. They got spurned by somebody else this offseason. Like they've missed on a ton of names. You can't miss that big on the outside market and let your homegrown star go. So you can't have both of those things go against you. So they did a good job.
As you guys were talking about that, I looked it up real quick just because I was curious for my own sake. There have now been 29 Major League Baseball contracts of 10 years or more, with Juan Soto's 15-year being the longest. So Vlad, right there, 14. I guess that just seems crazy to me. I mean, when you think about other sports, they don't even approach that number. These long contracts. I guess we'll start with Brady real quick. The length is that that seems crazy to me, but I guess it's just kind of the way things are with stars that are this age at this time. Just like you said, like I said, 15 years for Soto not long ago, and now 14 for Vlad.
Yeah, and it's rare because very rarely does a guy hit free agency at this age or close to it, right? Like think about the normal, quote, normal progression, right? American-born player goes to high school, goes to college, gets drafted at 22, spends 3 years in the minor leagues, comes up at 25, then plays 6 or 7 years on his rookie contract, and now he's 32 by the time he hits free agency. That guy's not getting 14-year, 15-year deal, okay? You have a rare case where a guy is drafted out of high school at 18, maybe comes up at 21. Now he's going to hit free agency at 27. Well, the team decides, hey, rather than let him hit free agency at 27, let's lock him up at 24. We're not afraid to give him 14 or 15 years. Same thing here with Vlad, signed as an international player, very, very young, blows through the minor leagues, makes his debut at a young age. You're not afraid. Look, teams are not afraid to give guys deal that take them until they're 40. Okay. So whether that means 8 years at age 32 or that means 14 years at age 26, that they're not really afraid of doing that. So it's rare because it's rare to see a player hit free agency or get close to free agency at this age. So I don't really have a problem with it. Where I'd have a bigger problem with it is if he was 32 and they gave him a 12-year deal. That would be more alarming to me than this.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to see how this impacts, like we talked about last week with the Kyle Tucker contract with the Cubs. I think for a few reasons, because going into the year, I always sort of thought that Tucker would wait it out and go to free agency, and I still think that's probably the smarter thing for him to do and what he'll end up doing. But we talk about being a little surprised that they did this extension during the season, so maybe does that mean that Tucker would be willing? I don't know. The two things aren't connected, but in some ways it's a little bit similar. And then also just the price. I think Tucker is probably the more well-rounded player in terms of the glove and his stolen base ability, and he still has the same power and average. So I could see him getting even equal or a bigger deal in terms of money. But I don't know about the 14 years would be interesting because he is 2 years older. But I'm sort of curious to see how this deal might affect that one.
The Tucker situation, one, he's going to get huge money. He's not going to get as long of money for the age reason that you said, Jack. But I also just think it's a different situation because there's no emotional attachment here to play into on either side, right? Like Kyle Tucker is right now, he's a hired gun. And the Cubs aren't emotionally attached to him. He's not emotionally attached to the Cubs. He's there to do a job for the Cubs and build up his own self-worth in the process. With Vlad Jr., right, like you get signed at 16 years old. Even though he's only 26, you're talking about a 10-year relationship there where there are front office relationships and scouting relationships and teammate relationships, and that can play on both sides. Because of that, the Blue Jays need him more, And he's probably more inclined to negotiate in season with the Blue Jays because it's where his friends and his baseball family are. And that's just not the situation that Tucker has right now. It might have been that way for Tucker in Houston, but it's not that way for Tucker in Chicago.
Well, I think this is a good segue, Brady, into something that you just brought up, kind of this timeline and some young players around the league. Going to kind of leave it open-ended for you. You can touch on whoever you want to there, but I think that is interesting when you talk about the timeline. Guys spend, X amount of years in the minors, they come up, and then the contract stuff kind of works into when it works into. But with some young players showing out even earlier, these contracts are probably going to become more and more common with the big years and the big money. So who I guess might be in this boat maybe in a couple of years, like we just saw with Vlad Jr.
Well, we've already seen Christian Campbell of the Red Sox come to a 10-year extension, right? He just made his major league debut. We saw Jackson Chourio last year get a contract before his major league debut, right? Teams are smart with this stuff. When they know they've got a star in hand, they're going to try to lock them up as early as possible because it saves the money down the road, right? Like it saves the headache down the road of $500 million, right? Player gets $150 million before they've ever stepped on the field. Well, it could have been 500, 700 if they get to free agency. So Christian Campbell already got his deal before, with 2 games of major league experience or whatever. Beyond that, James Wood is a guy whose name you should be knowing right now, right? Plays for the Nationals. He came up last year, immense power, former second-round pick, former top prospect. I don't have the stat in front of me, but became the youngest Nationals player with 2 homers and 5 RBIs in a game, except for Bryce Harper and Juan Soto. Like, that's pretty damn good company to be in there. So James Wood for the Nationals, a guy whose name I would certainly know. A lot of people not paying attention to the Nats. Kyron Paris is off to a great start for the Angels right now. There's a name to pay attention to also. But Christian Campbell's a guy who already got his deal. So be aware of him. He's part of that Red Sox kind of vaunted big 3 of prospects.
Yeah, you brought up a good name with Paris there. I had admittedly never heard of him until the Angels played it, against the White Sox this season, and the guy was incredible. Hit a home run, stole some bases. The Angels have been probably one of the biggest surprises of this season. We wrote about yesterday how 7-3 was tied for their best start in franchise history through 10, and obviously still very early. This team was not projected to be very good, but another young guy for them, Logan O'Hoppe, has been great, 5 home runs. Not sure how sustainable it is for the Angels, but at least they've been kind of exciting early on.
AL West as a whole is kind of a dumpster fire right now. So I don't think the Angels have staying power, but I don't think anybody in that division is particularly good right now. Texas is in front as we hit the weekend, but they had negative run differential. They were they were the first team in baseball history to win 8 of 10 games and be outscored by their opponents through those 10 games. They were 8-2. So like at some point, something's got to flip, right? The 1-run game ability, the close coin flip games got to start going the other way. So I don't think Texas is like all that great. I don't think the Mariners are particularly strong right now, and they're injured. The Astros are injured and also aging in spots. I don't think they're particularly good. The A's, I think, are interesting and frisky. I think they can beat teams, but I don't think they have a 162 staying power to go and win a division. So I think the winner of this division is an 85 to 88 win team, and I don't know who it's going to be yet, but it's certainly a wide open division.
Well, let's shift back to another player, Jack. I guess he's probably on his way out of being considered a young player. Cubs lefty Justin Steele, 29 years old, placed on the 15-day IL. How big of a deal is that? What's the latest? I mean, how does that matter, for the Cubs and all that moving forward?
Yeah, so he said he sort of had some elbow tightness during his last start, and they're calling it elbow tendonitis, which when you hear that is never very good. In terms of that could be linked to Tommy John. Not saying that they've said it is for Steele, but just you see that, and it never sounds good. But it's a big loss for the Cubs. Don't exactly know how long. He thought initially that it might just be a minimum stay, but you never really know with those things. I think he's been one of the more underrated pitchers in the NL the last couple of years. He's got the last 3 seasons, his ERA has been 3.18 or lower, and pitched over 100 innings. So he It's a big loss for the Cubs at the top of that rotation. And I sort of thought going into the year they needed to add another, whether it's an ace or a number two, because I sort of see Steele and Imanaga as, very good number twos, maybe not aces, to kind of carry your rotation. So it kind of puts the Cubs in a little bit of trouble here. I mean, I think the guys that could replace him in the rotation, they signed Colin Ray this offseason. He's sort of been like a middle reliever type of guy, but he has starting experience. Jordan Wicks was good at the start of last season with the Cubs and then got injured, and he's down in AAA. So he could be a candidate to replace him. But I've seen some fans talk about like Cade Horton. He's, I think, the Cubs' top pitching prospect. I don't know if they would be willing to call him up this early, because he had some injuries last year too. But it puts the Cubs in a little bit of a tough spot because the pitching's been great so far. And they'll certainly miss a guy like Steele.
Well, Brady, back over to you. You did a little bit of an intro there. AL West, NL West, slightly different positions for the two divisions. What can you continue to say about the AL West, and then also talk about how good the NL West is off to so far?
Yeah, so the AL West, like I said, is very, very mediocre, right? The Astros, I think, were very clearly in a step back this season, right? Not mean that they're not going to be competitive. I think they kind of read the market and see that the division is kind of up for grabs, and they don't necessarily have to be at the top of the market in order to win this division. So, but they clearly have come back to the pack, right? You lose Tucker, you lose Verlander, you lose Bregman, you then go with some young prospects like a guy like Cam Smith. They still made moves, but they lost. They traded Ryan Presley in the bullpen, so like they're not as good as they have been. Although they're always a threat because they're the Astros and they have some pitchers coming back eventually from injury as well. The Rangers are a fascinating team in that they won the World Series in 23, missed the playoffs completely in 24, and their roster is kind of a house of cards. They're banking a lot on Jacob deGrom, who certainly has the talent to be the American League Cy Young winner and also could end up missing significant portions of the season as he has for several years now. So they are probably the best talent team in this division, but the injury bug can certainly get them. It did get them last year. Corey Seager's missed time in his career. Marcus Semien plays a lot, but he had shown signs of a downturn last season as well. The Mariners were always, I think, a team that has the best pitching in the American League, or at least the best starting pitching in the American League, but the injury bug has gotten them. They are not built to withstand attrition, and they've already gotten it now. Like Victor Robles, who is their leadoff hitter and starting right fielder, is out for 12 weeks minimum right now with a fractured shoulder and a dislocated shoulder, so that's a huge loss that they can't really easily replace. They just lost their second baseman, Ryan Bliss, to a torn bicep. That could cost them the entire season, and without George Kirby, one of their top starting pitchers, they're not the same on that front. And not having him has led to a whole lot of attrition in the bullpen. The bullpen is overtaxed and overused already 13 games into the season. They sit at 5-8. So I wouldn't be feeling real good if I were anybody in the division right now, except for maybe the Angels. And they have the longest playoff drought in baseball right now. And they've had good seasons until the All-Star break with Trout and Ohtani. They no longer have Ohtani. I can't see this lasting for them either. NL West, by the way, is three juggernauts at the moment. Okay, yeah. The Dodgers are the reigning champions. They're the most talented team in baseball. The Padres are consistently over the last 5 years, among the biggest challengers in the National League. They're the first team to 10 wins. The Giants have been rolling. Now, look, they've gotten some, I don't want to call it luck. I don't want to say that, but they've gotten some, they won 2 walk-off games against the Mariners over the weekend. They've won a couple of low-scoring games. Maybe they'll come back to the pack, but they're certainly good. I don't know if they're great, but they're good. Diamondbacks got to the World Series 2 years ago, end up adding Corbin Burns this year. Corbin Carroll looks excellent at the start of this season when he didn't look that way last year. So they're good also. Now, the Rockies are horrible. They are disgustingly bad, but the other 4 teams are all playoff caliber.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think the interesting thing to see with the NL West is we were on here a couple weeks ago talking about it. I think we all were taking the over in terms of the Dodgers win total and maybe even saying, can they threaten the win title? The win record? I mean, that's got to be more of an effect when you're playing these three other really strong teams in the division. I think that'll be something interesting to track, just in terms of how much are the Dodgers able to separate themselves from those teams as they kind of go after that win record, because I still think they have the talent to do it. It just might be that, it might be a little bit tougher of a road to get there.
Dodgers and Padres both undefeated at home. Still, weirdly, Cleveland also, they've only played 2 games at home, but they are 2-0 at home. But that's it. I mean, taking care of business at home, doing pretty well on the road, and now you've got 2 teams that are doing better than anybody else in the entire league. That is kind of crazy. Does that change anything for you guys? I think you're right, Jack. I think everybody said they would surpass their projected win total by Vegas or whatever it was, and that all 3 of you even thought that it was possible that they could take down the win total. Does that change for you now, seeing how good everybody is in the division?
Yeah, I mean, I would still probably, I think, what was the line, like 105 or something in terms of their wins?
I think it was 106. Yeah,
106. Yeah, I mean, I would still feel good about that. I mean, the win record is probably the one that's more in question. I mean, I don't totally buy the Giants in terms of their longevity, but at the same time, I think, maybe you thought that this is what the Diamondbacks were going to be doing, so it might kind of balance out in that sense. But it's just tough to see the Dodgers not winning, healthily over 100 games, just with that starting rotation. They might even get Ohtani back in the rotation. The lineup is so deep with MVP caliber type of guys, and they've been there before, and they reinforced the bullpen. So it still wouldn't surprise me. I think it's just maybe a little bit more challenging than we thought it would be going into the year.
Can I give you a totally random stat from the week, Brandon?
Absolutely. I love stuff like that.
I'm very into this stuff as well. I talk about the Mariners' offensive futility. Like, sadly, the White Sox actually have a worse overall batting average than the Mariners do. But I mean, the Mariners went 1 for 19 with runners in scoring position on Tuesday. 1 for 19 with 19 strikeouts. Okay. And they lost a game in 12 innings in which they gave up no earned runs. But that's not the stat. What's the stat leads me to is there's actually teams that perform worse offensively than they do at certain points. So here's this one. I give you Angels Rays from Tuesday night. Okay. The Rays rather became the only team since 1920 to have a runner on third with no outs in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings and not score. Runner at third, nobody out, innings 7, 8, 9. They did not score one. They end up losing the game by a run. That is about as painful as it gets. I mean, 1 for 19 with 19 strikeouts, that was pretty tough to watch. But to lose a game by 1 and have runners at third, nobody out in the 7th, 8th, and 9th, that is like pull your hair out stuff.
It always blows. Like, how do you even track a stat like that? It always blows my mind.
People way smarter than me.
Yeah, it's incredible, some of the stuff that they pull. Baseball seems to pace the pack against all other sports, I feel like, with obscure, just so specific when it comes to, the people who track the stats and they come up with stuff like that. It's pretty incredible.
Well, here, you like this one, Jack? You're the Cubs guy. Well, you're a White Sox guy and a Cubs guy, but let me give you this one too. This one is even more random. This one comes from Justin Havens. He works over at Underdog Fantasy. He's really good at these kind of very random things. So this was also from Tuesday. Pete Crow Armstrong, second youngest Cubs outfielder with 3 hits, 2 RBIs, and 2 stolen bases in a game since Corey Patterson back in 2002. Oh, there you go. Second youngest Cubs outfielder, 3 hits, 2 RBIs, 2 steals in the same game.
Right, like what kind, like, yeah, that's what I mean. Like, what kind of a stat is that? Like, how do you track that down? That's incredible.
It's like the old movie Little Big League where the kid manages the Twins, and the announcer is like, "Well, he's hitting 458 in a dome at night, and games started by right-handed pitching."
Yeah, it's just what you have so many criteria. It's like, I feel like you could do that with every guy at every inning, in some way, shape, or form, if you really track the stuff down. All right, let's get us out of here on this, Jack. Nolan Arenado, off to a really good start with the Cardinals. There's trade talks. What's the move? What should they do? What will happen, do you think?
Well, I think they want to trade him. I mean, they tried to in the offseason and they came to an agreement with the Astros, but the issue here is the no trade clause with Arenado. I mean, he didn't want to go to the Astros, so he stayed in St. Louis and they weren't able to come to another deal. I mean, the problem the Cardinals face is they didn't do anything else in the offseason to actually build a competitive roster around him. So he's sort of just you know, out there, and he's kind of having a better start to the season, batting 310. But you know, the other factor is he's 34 years old. So how does that impact the trade market in terms of how much is someone willing to give up for this player who has incredible pedigree with his Gold Gloves and power in Colorado, but pretty clearly not the same player as he was in his prime. I think the Cardinals end up trading him just because keeping him doesn't really do you much. So maybe, you know, see what you can get for him, because I don't think they have the roster to compete. But it's kind of been a kind of crazy saga in terms of finding a trade partner and where is Arenado willing to go.
Happy birthday to Nolan Arenado. He will turn 34 actually in 6 days. So there you go. I checked that out real quick. We were talking about the young players. And I was like, all right, how old is this dude? And yeah, he's got a birthday coming up April 16th. So last but not least, we'll get us out of here. Brady, I always like hearing these things from you. You seem to have a pretty good pulse on everything. Where is your prediction? Where are your predictions now? We did a bunch of them for the preseason. We talked with Jack about the wins record for the Dodgers. I'm trying to remember. You picked someone other than the Dodgers to win the World Series. So now we're another week in. Let's put a bow on this week's episode with your thoughts about where things stand now with the win record, the current leaders of all the divisions, which I think there's probably some surprises in those, and your World Series look.
I'm not Mr. Prediction guy. I'm more Mr. Day-to-day guy. But I will tell you that I picked the Red Sox to win the World Series, or I picked the Red Sox to get to the World Series. And despite the fact that they are hovering around 500, I still think they're going to get there. I just think the American League is wide open, and I think the Red Sox are going to eventually rise to the cream of the crop and win the AL East. So they're sitting in third, I believe, right now. But and they've lost 3 of 4 so far to the Blue Jays before we record this on Thursday. I think they're still going to get to the World Series and win the division. So there, you want one bold prediction. I'm not off the Red Sox bandwagon.
And as our in-house AL Central guy, Jack, any love for my Tigers? What are my Tigers doing out there, man?
They played.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon, I feel like we were talking going into the season that you were all out on Javi Baez, and he's having a good start to the year, batting I think over 300, and that's even without a home run so far. So could see a little resurgence from him. Spencer Torkelson wrote about the other day. He's off to a great start after getting sent down last year. So maybe it just took him a little bit longer to live up to that number 1 pick hype. But I mean the AL Central is there for the taking. I mean, I think we all thought going into the year there'd be 4 teams that were all kind of similar, and that's sort of what it's been. The White Sox have 2-2, and then now they're 2-9, so they've been out of the picture for forever, but at least a bit more officially now. But yeah, they got a closer look at the Tigers this weekend, and I think they got what it takes to come out on top of a very winnable division.
Torque doing some nice things. Harvey, as he's maybe not affectionately known as here in the Detroit area, Harvey Baez, they call him on some of the radio shows because he's been so bad. But yeah, anyway, always got to ask about my Tigers a little bit. Guys, thanks so much. We had a hard out at 30 minutes. We're about to hit 29. I think we're in good shape. Thank you so much for the time, fellas, and we will be back next week for more baseball. We'll see if Tom is back with us. Feel a little bit empty without Tom's stuff here today, but Jack, Brady, thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.
Appreciate it.